The house was quieter than usual that evening, a silence that carried weight. My husband had left early for another one of his business dinners, the kind that had grown more frequent over the past year. I had grown used to his absence, though the emptiness never stopped pressing in on me, never stopped reminding me how long it had been since he looked at me the way he once did. I moved through the hallway with no real purpose, just the instinct of someone restless, searching for something to occupy the long hours. That's when I heard it, a faint sound, the unmistakable rhythm of someone caught up in their own world. My breath caught in my chest, and I followed the sound without even realizing my feet were moving. The door to the spare room was slightly ajar, light spilling out into the darkened corridor. I paused, hesitating, a voice in my head telling me to turn around, to respect the boundary I was about to cross. But something else, something sharper and heavier, pushed me forward. Through the narrow gap, I saw him, my husband's stepson. Alone. Vulnerable. His body tense, his face caught in a mixture of release and shame, unaware that anyone could be watching. A rush of heat surged through me, not desire at first, but shock, curiosity, and something I didn't want to name. I should have stepped back, I should have looked away. But I didn't. My eyes stayed fixed, drawn into the secret I was never meant to witness. I leaned against the wall, my pulse pounding. Questions raced through my mind. Why was he doing this here, in this house? Did he not fear being caught? And why did I care so much? Why couldn't I turn away? The truth, whispered in the back of my mind, was simple. I was starved for something, attention, intimacy, connection. And in that moment, standing in the doorway, I felt the strange collision of my own loneliness with his hidden vulnerability. I told myself I would leave, that this was none of my concern. But even as I thought it, I knew it was a lie. Something had shifted in me, something that wouldn't allow me to ignore what I'd seen. I stepped back silently, closing the door without a sound, my hand trembling against the wood. But the image was burned into me, lingering with a dangerous pull. By the time I reached my room, one thought refused to let me go. This wasn't the end. I couldn't just forget. I wouldn't. And somewhere deep inside, I already knew, sooner or later, I would intervene. The next morning, the house carried the weight of unspoken things. He moved through the kitchen with casual ease, making coffee, scrolling through his phone, as if nothing unusual had happened. But I knew. I had seen. And the knowledge sat inside me like a stone, heavy, impossible to ignore. I studied him carefully, the way his hair fell messily into his eyes, the way his shoulders seemed to carry both youth and a hidden burden. He was no longer the awkward boy I first met when I married his stepfather. He had grown into something else, someone at the border between recklessness and manhood. I told myself my intentions were good, that I wanted to help him, to ease the embarrassment of being caught even though he didn't know I had seen. Maybe he was lonely. Maybe he needed guidance. At least, that was the story I whispered to justify the urge pulling me toward him. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice softer than usual. He glanced up, surprised, but nodded. We sat at the edge of the living room, sunlight filtering through the curtains, cutting the space between us into golden shards. At first, the conversation was harmless, school, work, small things that carried no weight. But slowly, carefully, I steered us closer to what I couldn't let go. "You know," I began, my tone careful, "it's okay to feel things, to have moments where you don't quite know what to do with yourself." His eyes flickered, searching mine, a quick flash of unease crossing his face. He didn't ask how I knew, but I could see in his silence that he understood what I was implying. "I'm not judging you," I added quickly. I want you to know you don't have to be ashamed." There it was, the connection, fragile but undeniable. His shoulders loosened, his gaze softened, and suddenly the air between us felt charged, delicate, dangerous. We talked longer than I expected, about feelings he couldn't share with his father, about the loneliness that pressed on him when no one was around. I listened, truly listened, more intently than I had in years. And in that listening, I felt something stir inside me, something I had buried beneath years of neglect and silence in my marriage. His vulnerability became a mirror, reflecting my own emptiness back at me. And in that reflection, I found myself drawn closer, not just with words but with the quiet shifts of my body, leaning in, letting my hand brush against his just slightly, lingering longer than necessary. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. When the conversation ended, there was a silence that said more than words ever could. A silence that made my pulse quicken and my heart ache. I had told myself I only wanted to help. But deep down, I knew the truth. This was the beginning of something I could no longer control. The days that followed blurred together, each one heavier than the last. Every time we crossed paths, something unspoken lingered in the air. A glance that lasted too long, a smile that hinted at secrets, a silence that carried weight. The line between us was still intact, but it was thinning, fraying with every interaction. One afternoon, the house was unusually still. My husband had left for another late-night meeting, and the silence wrapped around me like a warning. I found him in the living room, sprawled carelessly on the couch, a book open but unread in his hands. I stood there longer than I should have, watching him, feeling the dangerous rhythm of my own heartbeat. He looked up, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath. "I keep thinking about what you said," he murmured finally. His voice was low, uncertain, but there was something behind it, an opening. I moved closer, my steps careful, as if I was crossing a bridge that could collapse beneath me. "And what is it you keep thinking about?" I asked, though part of me already knew. That maybe I don't have to feel ashamed. His eyes locked onto mine, and I saw not only vulnerability but something else: curiosity, desire, the very emotions I had been burying inside myself. I should have stopped then. I should have turned away, reminded myself of the vows I had taken, the life I had built. But the loneliness inside me roared louder than reason. I sat down beside him, the space between us narrowing until there was no space at all. The brush of his arm against mine felt electric, and when his hand trembled slightly, I placed my own over it, steadying him, or maybe steadying myself. The first touch was tentative, hesitant, almost innocent. But it didn't stay that way. The pull between us was magnetic, unstoppable. Words dissolved into silence, silence dissolved into breath, and breath dissolved into something deeper, something forbidden. When it happened, it wasn't just physical. It was every unspoken need, every neglected desire, every ounce of hunger that had lived inside me. I gave into it fully, knowing it was wrong, knowing it was reckless, but unable to stop. Afterward, the room felt different, heavier, charged, filled with the weight of what we had done. I lay there, my mind racing, my body still trembling with the aftershocks of surrender. I looked at him, and in his eyes, I saw the same thing I felt: guilt tangled with longing, fear tangled with exhilaration. There was no undoing it now. The line we had crossed was behind us, and the road ahead was uncertain, shadowed, dangerous. For the first time in years, I felt alive. But along with it came the crushing truth. There was no going back. The days that followed carried an unbearable silence, a silence that wasn't empty but thick with memory. Every time I looked at him, the echoes of that night returned, the heat of his touch, the thrill of forbidden intimacy, and the guilt that now gnawed at me like a wound that refused to heal. My husband remained oblivious, still consumed by his endless work, his meetings, his distractions. He asked no questions, noticed no shifts, and yet his absence made the betrayal feel even sharper. Each time I looked at him, I felt a pang of guilt so deep it made my chest ache. And yet, despite the guilt, the memory of what happened with his stepson lingered like a flame I couldn't extinguish. When our eyes met across the room, there was always a flicker, hesitation, longing, the haunting knowledge of what we had shared. Neither of us spoke of it, but the silence spoke louder than words ever could. At night, I lay awake, questioning myself. Was it loneliness that drove me to this? Neglect? Or something darker, something inside me I never wanted to face? I replayed the choices, step by step, as if dissecting them might bring me clarity. But clarity never came. He avoided me now, or maybe he was protecting himself. Our conversations had grown brief, careful, laced with the weight of what remained unspoken. A stolen glance here, a tense silence there. It was enough to remind me that everything had changed. I had thought the act itself would be the climax, the moment of release. But I was wrong. The true weight of infidelity lay not in the act but in the aftermath, the quiet destruction it left behind. One evening, as I prepared dinner, I caught him watching me from across the kitchen. His gaze lingered, filled with something I couldn't name, regret, maybe, or longing, or perhaps both. Our eyes met, and in that fragile moment, I almost spoke. I almost confessed everything. But instead, I turned back to the stove, stirring a pot that had already boiled over, my hands trembling. The words died in my throat, trapped by fear and shame. Now, I carry the secret like a shadow that clings no matter how bright the day. A secret that binds me to him in ways that terrify me, in ways I can never admit aloud. I am no longer the woman I was before. I am changed, marked by a choice that cannot be undone. And though the world may never know, I will always know. One moment of weakness, one choice to intervene, has rewritten my life forever. Sometimes I wonder if it was worth it. Sometimes I wonder if it was inevitable. And sometimes, late at night, when the silence grows unbearable, I whisper to myself the truth I cannot escape. One choice is all it takes to destroy everything.